My name is Eleanor. And I guess you could say I've always been the kind of mother who shows up sometimes even when I'm no longer invited. It was early December, about 6:30 in the evening, when I found myself sitting on my son's velvet couch, cradling a cup of peppermint tea. The lights from his 10-foot Christmas tree flickered softly across the room, wrapping everything in gold and comfort. I remember thinking how proud I was of that house, every corner, every detail. I had helped make it possible. But that night, something in the air felt different. There was a stillness that didn't belong to Christmas. Caleb, my only son, seemed distant, almost rehearsed in his silence. I could feel the words forming before they ever reached the surface, something about plans, guests, and this year being a little different. My hand stayed wrapped around the mug, trying to hold on to its warmth, because his words offered none. And in that moment, sitting in a room I helped build, I felt a kind of cold I hadn't known before. The kind that doesn't come from the weather, but from realizing your place in someone's life has quietly shifted. I didn't know it then. But that night was the beginning of everything that followed. The house that evening felt like a magazine spread, polished hardwood floors, silk curtains drawn just right, and the fireplace I'd helped install last spring casting that perfect amber glow. Sloane always wanted things to look elegant. And I suppose they did. Still, beneath all that beauty, something felt off. Like the warmth in the room didn't include me. I remember trying to bring up the holidays gently, hoping to keep things light. I thought maybe I could bring my maple roasted turkey, the one Caleb used to sneak bites from when he was little. It was such a simple thought, a way of staying connected. But the look on his face told me it wasn't welcome. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just smoothed the edge of the cushion and said something vague about this year being different. There it was, the space between us, not loud or cruel, just quiet and final. I could feel the polite distance Sloane preferred, the kind that sounds refined but cuts all the same. So I smiled, said my goodbyes, and gathered my coat. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like truth sharp, undeniable, and strangely clean. Behind me, the door clicked shut, soft but absolute. Driving home, I tried not to cry, but somewhere deep down, I knew something sacred between us had just shifted. And once it does, it rarely shifts back. 5 years before that night, everything had felt so different. Caleb and Sloane were newly married, wide-eyed and hopeful, dreaming about a place to call their own. I still remember the way Caleb's voice sounded when he told me they'd found the perfect house in a quiet Asheville neighborhood, a 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and big windows that caught the morning light. They were short on the down payment, just $10,000 at first, though that number seemed to grow with every phone call. When the inspection came back, it was $25,000. Then came the talk of new appliances, the granite counters, the hardwood floors to match the neighborhood. I told myself it was temporary, just a little help to get them started. I used money from Charles's life insurance, the savings we were supposed to travel on someday. He always wanted me to see Maine in the fall, but I thought helping our son build a future was the better choice. The months blurred into years. I started sending $2,600 every month to cover their mortgage. It became automatic, like brushing my teeth or paying my own bills. 60 months passed that way. Quietly, almost invisibly. I gave up small luxuries without thinking. The dental crown I never got, the shoes I wore long after the soles gave out. Dinner most nights was peanut butter on toast. And vacations were something other people took. Still, I never complained. I told myself this is what mothers do, we give until the world feels safe for our children. But as time went on, the world I was holding up began to drift further away from me. Invitations slowed. Calls grew shorter. Eventually, even Sundays went silent. I thought I was helping them build a life. I didn't realize I was slowly erasing myself from it. For a while, I tried to tell myself it wasn't personal. Maybe they just wanted a quieter holiday. Or maybe I'd misunderstood. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't about space or timing, it was about belonging. Sloane had this way of making exclusion sound polite. Almost elegant. She'd talk about atmosphere and tradition. About wanting things to feel refined for her parents. What she really meant was that I didn't fit the picture she was trying to paint. Too simple. Too sentimental. Too ordinary for the kind of Christmas they wanted to show off. Caleb didn't argue. He just stood there, letting her words hang in the air like something he couldn't stop. Or maybe didn't want to. That was the part that hurt the most, his silence. The same boy who once couldn't go a day without calling me now avoided eye contact when I mentioned the holidays. As I sat in my small kitchen that night, I looked around at the peeling paint. The old appliances. The chipped mug I'd had since Charles was alive. Every corner told the story of sacrifice. And somehow, it still wasn't enough to earn me a seat at their table. I realized then that I had become something invisible, a quiet wallet in the background of their beautiful life. They wanted the benefits of my love, not the presence of it. And that's when something inside me shifted. If I wasn't welcome in their world, then maybe my money didn't belong there either. The next morning, I decided it was time to act. The next morning, I stood at my kitchen counter around 9:12 in the morning. The winter light spilling through the window like a quiet witness. The fridge hummed behind me. That same tired sound I'd learned to tune out over the years. My coffee had gone cold. But I didn't mind. I was thinking too clearly to care. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel helpless. I felt steady. My hand rested on the counter as I reached for the phone. The numbers I'd dialed 100 times before suddenly felt heavier. Like each one carried the weight of every yes I'd ever said. When the voice on the other end asked what I needed, I told them calmly that I wanted to stop an automatic transfer. $2,600 every month. For 5 years. I'd said it so many times before. It almost didn't sound real anymore. But when I heard the confirmation that the transfer was canceled effective immediately, something inside me lifted. It was as if a door I didn't know was locked had finally opened. I hung up the phone and stood in silence. My heart racing but my body still. For the first time in years, I wasn't giving out of obligation. I was choosing myself. The relief was quiet, almost sacred. And as I stood there, I realized this wasn't revenge. It was release. But that was only the beginning of what came next. After hanging up that call, I stood for a long time in the quiet. The house felt different, lighter somehow. Like it had been holding its breath right along with me. I walked over to the drawer in my hallway. The one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a manila folder. Thick with bank statements, receipts, and transfer slips. Proof of every sacrifice I'd made without question. I carried it to the kitchen table and spread everything out like pieces of a story I'd tried too hard to forget. The numbers stared back at me. $2,600 a month. 60 months. 15,600美元. Not counting the down payment. Not counting the endless little extras that always seemed to follow. For a moment, I just looked at it all. Then I gathered the papers and walked to the fireplace. The same one I'd paid to have installed. I struck a match. And one by one, fed the pages to the flames. The air filled with the soft crackle of release. That fire wasn't about anger. It was closure. Years of silent giving turned into smoke. Drifting upward, finally free. And as the last page curled into ash, I felt ready for whatever was coming next. 3 days later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, enjoying a fresh cup of coffee and the rare quiet of my own company. When I saw my name staring back at me from the Sunday paper, it took a moment for my brain to catch up with my eyes. there it was an article about me. A story claiming I had stranded Sloane's parents at the airport during a winter storm. Except there hadn't been a storm. It was sunny that day. Mild even. And no one had asked me for a ride. The whole thing read like a script. Carefully designed to humiliate me, without ever saying my name too harshly. It was the kind of punishment polite people deliver sharp, quiet, and dressed in manners. I knew exactly whose fingerprints were on it. Sloane's father. Martin King. The man who loved control almost as much as reputation. He'd made sure their version sounded believable. Respectably even. I sat there for a long time, letting the shock fade into something steadier clarity. They wanted to rewrite the story of who I was. And maybe they thought I'd stay quiet. The way I always had. But that morning, I started pulling out the truth receipts. Transfers. Text messages. Photos. Each piece a page of my real story. If they wanted public lies, I would show them public truth. I didn't plan to shout. I planned to show. By Christmas Eve, I had made my decision. The truth was no longer something to whisper about, it was something to stand in. Around 6:30 that evening, I pulled into their quiet neighborhood. The windows of Caleb's house glowed with soft golden light, laughter spilling out into the cold. Every car in the driveway told me what I already knew they were hosting. The kind of perfect holiday they had always wanted. One that didn't include me. I was dressed simply but with care. A navy wool coat, black gloves, and my mother's silver brooch pinned near my collar. In my hands, a leather satchel filled with 12 neatly labeled folders. Inside each was a record of what I had paid for the down payment, the mortgage transfers, the renovation receipts. Even a copy of that newspaper article marked with weather records and timestamps. The front door was unlocked. Of course, that house had always been proud of its safety. I stepped inside quietly. For a moment, all I could hear was the clinking of glasses, the hum of small talk, the easy comfort of people who believed they'd won. Then, like a ripple through water, the room went still when they noticed me. I didn't raise my voice or explain myself in anger. I simply walked around the table and placed a folder in front of each guest. I told them, softly, that I wanted them to have the full story, the story behind the house they sat in, the wine they drank, the celebration they were enjoying. As the papers opened and pages began to turn, the room changed. Curiosity turned into discomfort, then into silence. I could see it, the numbers, the transfers, the evidence of what I had built for them while being pushed out of it. I didn't need to say more. I just told them I wished them the kind of Christmas that couldn't be bought. And I walked out into the night. The air outside was sharp, honest, and finally mine. And for the first time in years, I felt warm. By March, the noise had quieted. I hadn't heard from Caleb or Sloane since that night. Though I'd seen the subtle ripples their silence left behind. The neighbors stopped offering half smiles. And the holiday glow that once spilled from their windows never returned. I assumed the facade had finally cracked. Then one afternoon, around 2:10, the doorbell rang. A delivery certified mail. I signed for it without thinking, and stood in my kitchen with the heavy envelope in my hand. Inside was a notice of default. 3 missed payments. Total owed $7,800. 14 days to make it right, or face foreclosure. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not really. What I felt was distance, like I was watching a story I no longer had to play a part in. I set the letter down and poured myself a cup of tea. The good kind I used to save for special occasions. The steam rose in slow curls, soft and unhurried. My phone lit up more than once that week, numbers I knew by heart. Names that once pulled at my chest. But I didn't answer. Not out of spite. But peace. I had spent years fixing, smoothing, saving. It was time to let consequences find their rightful owners. And for the first time, the quiet in my home didn't ache, it simply felt earned. It was a Thursday evening when the knock came. I almost didn't answer. I'd grown used to the quiet, to the peace that comes from not waiting for anyone. But when I opened the door, there he was, Caleb. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, eyes tired in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child after a night of bad dreams. He looked at me like a man who didn't quite know how to start. I stepped aside and let him in. The house smelled of fresh paint and rosemary. My new curtains hung neatly, the same ones I'd finally bought with my own money. It took him a second to take it all in, the small, simple life I had built without him. He began to talk, softly at first, then with a kind of heaviness that filled the room. He told me about the stress, the arguments, the missed payments, and how quickly everything had fallen apart once the money stopped. But underneath it all, I could hear something truer, a kind of shame he didn't know how to name. He admitted he'd let others decide my worth, that he'd believed comfort mattered more than character. I listened, not as a mother desperate to fix things, but as a woman learning to stand still in her truth. I told him I had already forgiven him. But forgiveness wasn't a doorway back, it was a path forward. One he'd have to walk with honesty and effort. When he looked up at me, I caught a glimpse of the boy I used to know. Not the polished version shaped by someone else, but my son. For the first time in years, I believed there was hope, not for the old life, but for something better. Spring came softly that year, almost shy at first. The dogwoods bloomed early, and for the first time in years, I noticed. Maybe it was because my world had finally slowed down enough for me to see it. I began to rebuild, not out of revenge or pride, but out of peace. I replaced the old refrigerator that rattled like an anxious heartbeat. I fixed the cracked window in the guest room that had let in the winter chill for far too long. I bought myself a proper reading chair, the kind Charles used to say I deserved. With every small repair, I felt pieces of myself coming back together. Then there was Ava, my former neighbor's granddaughter, a young single mom who lived a few blocks away. She dropped by one afternoon with a pie. And somehow that visit turned into dinners, laughter, and little drawings from her two kids taped across my fridge. They started calling me Grandma Eleanor, and I never corrected them. It felt right. Those evenings were messy and loud in all the best ways: sticky fingers, paper plates, spilled juice, real joy. I realized that love didn't need permission, and family didn't have to be written in blood. Sometimes, it just shows up at your door with a pie and a smile. And for me, that was more than enough. Looking back now, I can see that everything that fell apart was simply making space for what was real. For years, I thought being left out meant I wasn't enough, too plain, too sentimental, too ordinary. But it wasn't rejection. It was redirection. Life has a way of removing what no longer honors you, even when it hurts. If I've learned anything, it's that generosity without respect turns into obligation, and love without boundaries turns into loss. It took me far too long to understand that helping someone doesn't mean shrinking yourself for their comfort. You can give and still keep yourself whole. Now, my evenings are cuter, but they're filled with peace. Sometimes Ava's kids stop by with drawings or cookies, and I sit on the porch watching the sun go down with a cup of tea in hand. It's simple, but it's mine. To anyone listening who's ever felt forgotten by their own family, I want you to remember this: you are not invisible, and your worth isn't measured by who chooses to see it. If this story touched something in you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell me what moment you decided to start choosing yourself again. Maybe that's how we remind each other that being seen starts with looking inward first.